Спасибо. Прошу вас. Прошу вас. Добрый день, дорогие друзья, уважаемые дамы и господа. Я приветствую участников и гостей Российской энергетической недели, признанной авторитетной площадки для диалога по ключевым темам глобальной энергетики. Такое прямое, открытое.
Frank and open conversation is what we particularly need now, that global economy, on the whole, the fuel and energy sector are going through an acute crisis provoked by energy price fluctuations and an imbalance between supply and demand, as well as an outrightly disruptive action by certain market participants who are guided exclusively by their own geopolitical ambitions and seek open discrimination of the market, and if it doesn't work, they simply eliminate the infrastructure of their competitors. In this particular case, I'm talking obviously about the subversion on the downstream pipelines Nord Stream 1 and 2. There's no doubt it was an act of international terrorism aiming to undermine the energy security of a whole continent. The calculation behind it was quite cynical: to block and destroy the cheap energy sources and deprive millions of people and industrial consumers of gas, heat, power and other resources, and force them buy all of these at much higher prices, to force them to do so. Attack against the Nord Streams was a most dangerous precedent. It shows that any piece of critical transport, energy or communications infrastructure is at risk now, regardless in what part of the world it is, who operates it, and whether it is an offshore or offshore infrastructure. Well, I wouldn't like to speak about it as the energy week. It is not directly related, but at the same time I can't but mention that the terrorist attack against the Crimean bridge committed by Ukrainian special services is an example, a proof. I mentioned already that the Kiev regime has long been using terrorist methods. It plots political assassinations, ethnic cleansings and reprisals. They upload it on the internet, realize it was a mistake and delete it. But everything is stored on the internet. Nor do they stop at nuclear terrorism. I'm talking about shellings. The Kursk and Zaporozhye NPPs. Attempts to explode the Turkish Stream pipeline is on the same list. All these facts are proven and duly documented. The masterminds and instigators of these crimes are the end beneficiaries, those who profit from instability and conflict. Who is behind the subversion of Nord Streams? Obviously, the one who seeks to finally cut off the ties between Russia and the EU, seeks to finish off and undermine the political subjectness of Europe, weaken its industrial potential and control the market. And definitely the one who is technically, let me stress it, technically capable of performing such explosions, and the one who has already resorted to such subversions and was caught red-handed but remained unpunished. The beneficiary is obvious, and I think I don't have to go into detail here. The geopolitical importance of the remaining gas systems becomes particularly important. They go through Poland, Yamal Europe in particular, through Ukraine. There are two pipelines. It's what Russia, back at the time, built for its own money, and definitely the US, that can now supply energy sources at high prices. As they say, in decent societies, highly likely it's all clear. We understand, we know who is the beneficiary, who is behind all this. Now they can impose on European countries large volumes of the natural gas from the US that can't compete with Russian pipeline gas, because prices for the US LNG is much higher. Everyone had known it before and now particularly. But there are additional risks apart from the prices. The risk is that These supplies are unstable, and at any time they can be rediverted to other parts of the world. That's what we have witnessed. And quite recently, when US tankers shipping LNG to Europe turned halfway and changed their points of destination, because owners of the LNG were offered a higher price elsewhere. The interests of European consumers were neglected. Let me also remind you who, back at that time, lent a hand to Europe and increased gas volumes to Europe. It was Russia, but leaders of these countries prefer not to think of it. On the contrary, they consider it possible to blame us as a neutral partner and supplier. Are we denying the supplies? We are ready to supply, and we are doing so in accordance with the contracts. We are supplying the whole volumes under the contracts. If someone doesn't want to buy our product, what can we do with it? It's your decision. On many occasions did I stress that the Nord Streams have no political aspects whatsoever. These are commercial projects with equal participation of Russian and European companies, meaning that the future of the pipelines, of the streams, is something that Russia and our partners in the EU should decide together. Let me say this. The pipelines running through the bottom of the Baltic Sea can be repaired, obviously, but it will make sense only in case their further use is economically justified, and definitely when the security is guaranteed. This is a prime condition. If, together with our European colleagues, we take together the decision to supply gas through the remaining one string of Nord Stream 2, apparently it still remains operational, and unfortunately we are not allowed to test it, but the pressure remains stable. Probably it was impaired. We don't know, we can say it. We are not participating in the investigation, but the pressure is stable, so it remains operational. Its capacity is 27.5 billion cubic meters a year, or about 8% of total gas imports to Europe. Russia is ready to start such supplies. The ball is in the court of the EU. If they want, they can just open the tap. Let me reiterate, we don't limit anyone. In particular, we are ready to supply additional volumes in autumn and winter. More than once, including from the platform of the Russian Energy Week, did I elaborate on the root causes and nature of this crisis, including excessive obsession with renewables to the detriment of hydrocarbons. Well, definitely, one should deal with renewables, sun, wind, power and hydrocarbons, and tide power, but we should do it in coordination with the volumes that are consumed today and the tempos of the global economy and the demands for energy resources and the level of technological development. But for political motives, one shouldn't run ahead. But that's exactly what they were doing, and so there we are. And rollback of nuclear energy is in the same list. A shift from long-term gas contracts to the spot prices is another example. Experts estimate that this year alone, the spot price building mechanism for gas will incur in Europe a loss of over 300 billion euros, or around 2% of the Eurozone GDP. This could have been avoided if long-term oil-linked contracts had been used. The difference... professionals are assembled here, you understand what I'm talking about. The difference between the spot market and the long-term contracts, the prices under the contracts, is 3 to 4 times. Who's done it? Was it us? No. They have imposed it on us. They simply forced Gazprom to shift to the link to the spot market, and now they are deploring it. They are to blame themselves. It's clear how this problem with the prices will be dealt with if the prices remain high. We've seen it in the past. With regard to other goods, they'll simply print money. In the past year alone, the money supply in the EU increased by 1 trillion euros. But the problem is that for this money, Europe, just in the case, as in the case of other goods like food, will buy up gas from the world market. Hence, the Romanian countries will have to pay more for these resources. The resources, the volumes entering the European markets are sold at exorbitant prices, and it triggers inflation in its turn. In the Eurozone, it has already reached the level of 10%. Common European citizens are suffering. Over the past year, the electricity and gas bills rose by more than three times. As back in the Middle Ages, people started buying woods. Why is Russia to blame? They tried to blame someone else for it. In this case, on Russia. They are to blame themselves. It's not the result of any actions under the special military operation in Ukraine, in Donbass. Not in the least. It is a result of the erroneous energy policy throughout the past years. The growing costs hits local industries. For some goods, there is a double-digit decrease in the production output. Deprived of affordable energy resources from Russia, European businesses are forced to close or look for better conditions in foreign jurisdictions. This process is ongoing. Here, I cannot but refer to some statistics. According to the European statistics, the exports to Russia in 2021 amounted to 89.3 billion euros, and imports from Russia 162.5 billion euros. The deficit in favor of Russia is $73.2 billion. And in the first month of this year, it increased up to 103.2 billion euros. Why? We are selling our goods. We are ready to buy European production, but they don't sell it to us. They imposed a ban on certain groups or categories of goods, hence the shortage. Why are we to blame? We sell what they want to buy. On market prices, for market prices, we are ready to buy, but you are not selling. So the shortages are growing. Well, we are not to blame. You shouldn't abandon the cooperation with Russia. And let me also say this. European officials of the top level are stressing themselves. The European well-being of the past decades was largely based on cooperation with Russia. The repercussions of the partial ban on Russian goods are already affecting the economies and citizens of Europe, but instead of working to regain their competitive advantages, their own competitive advantages in the form of cheap and reliable energy sources from Russia, the Eurozone countries only exacerbate the situation. In particular, they decided to put a price cap on crude and refined oil from our country. It's not what the EU is doing, also the US. They plan to start applying it in December. In this quote, in this context, let me quote the American economist, Nobel Prize laureate Milton Friedman. Quote, "If you want to create a shortage of tomatoes, for example, just pass a law that retailers can't sell tomatoes for more than 2 cents per pound. Instantly, you'll have a tomato shortage. It's the same with oil or gas." End of quote. Let me remind you, Milton Friedman died in 2006. He had nothing to do with Russian government and can't be considered as an agent of Russia. This might seem a banality, but the leadership of some European countries, as bureaucratic top, ignores these obvious considerations. on someone else's order, they deliberately pursue the policy leading to deindustrialization of their countries and decreasing the quality of life of their people. This will entail irreversible consequences.
It should be crystal clear: if the price of oil from Russia or other countries is restricted, if some artificial price caps are introduced, this will inevitably deteriorate the investment climate in the whole global energy sector. It will further trigger growing global deficit in energy and further price growth. And once again, it will deal a blow to the poorest states primarily. These are inevitable consequences that are clear, and the world-renowned experts, and I've already quoted them, talked about this all the time. No interventions or releasing of oil reserves will rectify the situation. There would simply be no available resources in needed quantity, and you should understand that, finally. The thing is that, due to assertive promotion of the green agenda, and of course this should be supported, as I've mentioned, but you need to do it in a reasonable way. And when we're talking about an assertive promotion of the green agenda, including in the EU, a global oil and gas sector turned out to be underinvested already. At the same time, the leading oil producers, and I'm talking about some 20% of the global industry, they were sanctioned by the EU and the US. As a result, in 2020-2021, the investment in oil and gas production dropped to the minimal level of the past 15 years. Do you see that? In 2020-2021, way before the beginning of our special military operation in Donbass. And this investment turned out to be over 2 times lower than in 2014 due to the actions of the so-called Western politicians. The business underinvested some $2.5 trillion US. I will mention it in particular, but what does the OPEC Plus decision have to do with that? The OPEC Plus decision is aimed at balancing the global market, but they found the scapegoat, and it's not quite clear. They hide their mistakes behind that, but I will tell it additionally. Let me note another important aspect. Let's assume that, as I've already mentioned, a notorious oil price cap is introduced, but who would give you any guarantees that such price cap would not be introduced in other sectors of economy, in agriculture, in semiconductors industry, in fertilizers, in metallurgy? And I'm talking about price caps not only on Russia, but also on other countries of the world. Nobody will give such guarantees. And that means that by their reckless decisions, some Western politicians are putting at risk the global economy. They are destroying the well-being of the whole humanity. The Western neoliberal masterminds already have an experience in destroying traditional values, and we already see this, and it looks like they now switch to the freedom of entrepreneurship. Russia has always lived up to its commitments, and that is what makes us completely different from Western states. They cynically refuse to implement concluded contracts in finance and technology, in equipment supplies and maintenance. Let me say one thing: Russia's actions will not defy common sense. We will not pay for others' well-being at our own expense. We will not supply energy to those countries that limit the energy prices, to those who, instead of business partnership and market mechanisms, prefer cheating tricks and brazen blackmail. And we've been living in this paradigm, political paradigm, for over a decade. And let me say that we will not act to our detriment. Bear this in mind. Our principal position is to ensure stable and balanced energy markets and the safe future of peoples, and this could be done only by ensuring joint efforts via an open, honest dialogue on the principles of shared solidarity and account for the national interests. And it is this kind of dialogue that we enjoy with our OPEC Plus partners, and I've already mentioned that. As you know, not so long ago, new arrangements were achieved within this agreement. They take into account primarily the trends in oil supply and demand, as well as long-term investment programs in oil sector. As I've already mentioned, this sector has been underinvested clearly. In October, the oil output quota for our countries will remain at the August level, and later on it will be reduced by 2 million barrels per day. We expect that these decisions will suit both the oil producers and the oil consumers. Having said that, the OPEC Plus partners will certainly continue coordinating their actions to ensure stable and predictable oil markets. And the experts understand that the issue of predictability is key here. Dear colleagues, Russia is one of the key participants to the global energy market in terms of oil and gas production and export, in terms of volume of electric power generation and coal mining. Our country is one of the world leaders. Despite the sanctions and the acts of sabotage on our infrastructure, we will not and we will hold our ground. We will continue to ensure our own energy security. We will continue developing ties with those countries that are interested in it. The level of oil output in Russia has already overcome the decline, and it stands higher, somewhat higher than last year. We expect that by 2025, the overall volume of oil export, just like oil production in our country, will be preserved at the current level. Over the past decade, Russian oil production has been mainly largely dependent on foreign equipment, but by 2025 we expect to increase the share of Russian equipment in the industry to 80%. Hence, although Western companies left the Russian market, we will be able to ensure the needed volume of oil output. As for the Russian gas, definitely we will release our goods to the global market. Such projects as the Power of Siberia and Turk Stream prove to be efficient. With regard to the domestic Turkish market, we have a Blue Stream pipeline, and 14 billion cubic meters of gas are being transited via the Turk Stream. It's not a lot, but still it's enough. So what should I say in this regard? This lost level of transit via the Nord Stream, via the Baltic Sea, could be shipped to the Black Sea, and hence we could ensure that the main routes for the supplies of our oil and natural gas to Europe are ensured via Turkey, thus making a key gas hub in Europe in Turkey. If our European partners are interested, of course there is some economic interest, and the level of safety is much higher here. High-tech segment of liquefied natural gas is gaining momentum. In August, its production in Russia grew by almost 60%. Yamal LNG plant is operating successfully. It is located in the Arctic latitudes. Our systemic measures to explore the Arctic resource base, to develop northern sea routes and transport ice-breaking fleets are yielding results, and we will continue to further bolster the energy export to fast-growing markets, and certainly we intend to expand the supplies geography. In the near future, we will identify key infrastructure facilities to this end, and we will start constructing them, including such promising projects as the Power of Siberia 2 and the Mongol part of the Power of Siberia 2, Soyuz Vostok, as well as the linking of Asian and European segments of national gas transport system. We will continue to support LNG terminals projects. All the strategic and very specific tasks in this area have already been set to the Russian government, and I'm confident that they will be resolved. We will also continue turning to payments in national currencies when it comes to Russian energy supplies. I've already mentioned one of such examples. Gazprom and its Chinese partners decided to switch to ruble and yuan in equal shares with regard to payments for gas supplies. Some of the European partners, as you are well aware, also switched to the payments in Russian national currency, in rubles. Dear colleagues, naturally, Russia has been and will be one of the key participants to the global energy market, but our key task is to ensure that the Russian fuel and energy sector is contributing to the national economy, increasing its competitiveness. It helps develop and ensure the well-being of our regions, cities, settlements. It helps raise the living standards of our citizens. And a separate strategic track is to increase the volume of raw materials processing. We are already implementing large-scale plans in this area, including in the Far East. We have launched the projects to develop large and small-scale petrochemical and gas chemical industry. I am confident that in the near future the number of such projects will increase. Social gasification program is gaining momentum. I'm talking about residential houses in cities and settlements that have pipeline gas. As of early October, gas has been laid onto the landlords of over 300,000 households. At the same time, for many citizens, the cost of gas equipment and the works at the lot is a heavy burden. It is a strain for the family budget. Primarily, I'm talking about families with many children, veterans, and persons with disabilities and low-income families. Certainly, we need to provide assistance to them. In particular, I'm asking the regional authorities to ensure subsidies to citizens in need so that they could buy gas equipment and all the necessary works within their lot. And such subsidies should amount to at least 100,000 rubles per one gas grid connection. I understand that regions have different possibilities in terms of budgets, and that is why providing subsidies in Russian entities with low budget shall be supported by federal resources. I ask the government to monitor the implementation of this support measure and to assess whether extra steps are needed here. And there's another new decision. We have already agreed to include schools in social gasification program and to build gas supply systems there. I believe that it would be right if soon the government, together with Gazprom, could take similar decisions with regard to the medical facilities, hospitals, clinics, first aid stations. Hence, the key social facilities for the territories, both medical and educational ones, will receive the source of cheap and clean energy, which is especially important for the rural area. Overall, given new requests from the citizens and expanding number of connected facilities, I instruct the government to extend the program of social gasification beyond 2022. And another thing, despite the challenging economic situation, external restrictions, the capacities of Russian electric energy sector continues to be updated. This year, we put into operation and modernized facilities for over 2,000 megawatts. Such a systemic approach allows us to keep energy prices in Russia at the lowest level in Europe. Let me remind you that in the EU countries, this year alone, these prices grew multifold. Special attention should be paid to increasing the safety of the power grid. For the regions with the most difficult situation, special programs were developed this year, and I ask the government to start implementing them as soon as possible. Dear friends, the modern global energy sector faced unparalleled challenges and problems. Over many years, the international community has been dragged into this situation by short-sighted, flawed actions of a whole number of states. I've already mentioned that, and I believe that I was pretty convincing. The search for a constructive way out of this situation certainly should be the subject of a meaningful expert discussions, namely at the platform of the Russian Energy Week. Let me reiterate, Russia is ready to have a trust-based partnership in the energy sector that would serve the benefit of sustainable development of our countries and the safe, supply in affordable energy, and we know that such an approach is shared by the overwhelming majority of our partners and the states of the globe. I wish you successful work, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you. I wish you all the best.